Lauren, thank you so much for doing this. It's really lovely to sit down and have this time with you. And I really wanted to understand more from a layman's perspective, some of my clients, for instance, who might be in the process of having to report to CSRD on water for the first time and new to understanding that, very familiar with carbon perhaps and not so much with water, and also big clients that have been reporting on a voluntary basis themselves on their water use, but now moving into the CSRD mandatory reporting process. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your company, and then we'll move on from there.
Sounds great, thank you. So I am the program manager, and I can speak to the camera or to you, of SCS Global Services. We're based out of San Francisco. Why I was basically hired about a year ago was to bring about a new water standard. We do everything from building out standards to consultancy, looking at specifically validation, verification, and certification for organizations. It's obviously important from an independent, neutral, third-party perspective. Just seeing in this day of what I'd like to say greenwashing, but also just these large vocal claims that some of these major multinationals have across the board, and just saying that they are, water neutral, water positive, even going as far as implementing innovative tech. What are those basis for those technologies, those targets, and being able to really disseminate between the weeds of how they're doing it?
It's so interesting because I obviously, as you know, spend a lot of my time helping clients to understand greenwashing or how to avoid greenwashing. And we've had European standards, we've had British, Singapore have got some, Australia have got some. I do think water could be the next forefront, in the front line of greenwashing and being prosecuted around greenwashing if they don't have, as you're saying, that third party independent verification, which is so important so that you're not marking your own homework, or these organisations are not marking their own homework. How, I know that you've created a standard and I really want to hear about the standard, but can you also talk to me about how much value your clients put on, and I don't know if you can say the specific clients, but the idea of those clients and how much value they put on that independent third party significance?
So in this day and age, just when there isn't other value in they're just saying on a spreadsheet that you're doing what you're doing. In essence, it's taking a further step in credibility and independent assurance to basically putting a claim and an achievement on that site. So what SCS has done is basically going in and being a little bit lawless, but above and beyond the law, and holding that company accountable. I think we see things all across the board in the way that companies do get away with things, and being able to check them on it, to create non-conformities to them, and also there's backlash to that. So I don't think people really understand that, oh great, all is well, we're coming out with this great target, how are we going to actually achieve that target, but actually then the backlash from it. So there's a lot of steps also on the other side of it as well.
And so when you're looking at the standard, and I'd love you to tell me about that in a second as well, but when you're looking at the standard, you're looking at the process that your clients are going through in order to meet those targets. Are you looking at the milestone achievements that they're going to reach, or are they setting the target and then it's up to them to figure their way there? Because we see so many clients with carbon in particular that make these big, bold, ambitious statements, and then when it gets to, if they've made a statement for 2030, I know very well-intentioned regions and organisations that are struggling to actually get there, because the reality of achieving it, as you just said, requires so much sort of behaviour change and management and process and systems change, and there's a lot of work to get there.
I think it starts with that corporations are becoming more and more politicized. that's sort of the basis, I think, for a lot of this. There's a lot of funds being moved in different directions to just build out what scrutiny that they're going to be receiving from stakeholders in a really valid way. So not taking a devil's advocate approach on the corporation side, but they're under a lot of heat under what is coming from general public, consumers, their own products, as well as from investors, their stakeholders, and then where they're at in their catchment or their site. So I think we at SCS, we're not helping them build those targets, because that would be more or less a firewall that we would need to cross. We do have the consultancy side, but as auditors, we definitely do not help them with, hey, your target should be up here in the sky. Just a comment on the targets. We've seen clients that have really achievable targets and they meet them and they're proud of them, and then they keep going, where a lot of other corporations are creating these very high in the sky, and we sort of know why, but I think there's going to be this middle ground that they're not going to be reaching their targets by 2030, and it's more the humbleness to come upon the society and say, here is actually where we're at.
We need so much more of that in the industry, just in sustainability in general. Just people saying this is quite tricky and this is where we're at.
Yeah.
We're not going to greenwash and elevate, exaggerate what we're doing. We're just going to be truthful and tell you this is exactly what it is, and that's really great. We want to hear that, because it's more important for the industry to be inspired to keep moving. And I think if you know you're failing a target, you don't push hard enough, and we need people to be moving forward. And as you're, I think,
there's
saying,
and there's always a reason why they might be failing, and I think they're afraid to actually say sometimes why. We're all about here across the world about the Northeast and the graph and more revenue, and we are coming to a tricky point just in our global economy of how are we actually going to do that on a scale with a growing population, with the increase of climate change, et cetera, et cetera.
And so your clients, are you able to give us an overview of the sorts of businesses that they are in? I don't know if you're allowed to name any clients, but if you're able to give us an idea of the sorts of businesses that are drawn to third-party auditing and the standard that I will ask you to explain in this answer as well.
We have clients, maybe surprisingly, unsurprisingly, all across the board now. Probably 5 years ago, it would have just been food and bev and, textiles, but we're at a point now where we're seeing chemicals, manufacturing, education, big water, bottled water. We're seeing construction side, the engineering side. It's really a fun sector to be in, to sort of see all sides of the game. Yeah,
that's really interesting. So tell me what the standard is that you've created and why it's so unique.
So the standard was built primarily off of what it is, where we got clients' feedback from, and just in the last few years, in saying we want a standard that's built from a sense of it's easy to read, it's based on all ISO principles, so it's a very ISO heavy standard, but not heavy in a way that's hard to get through, heavy in a way that it's actually very comprehensive and structured and easy to follow, and I think that's a very universal approach. SCS is known for its standards. We've built them since back in the 80s, so we're very proud of only building out standards, adhering to them. I think a couple of key points about the standard are it's site specific, so it's not up and down the catchment. We are looking at specific parts of the catchment, but it's specific to your site as well as being on product, which I think is another big ask from clients. across the world at this point, for them to be interacting with claims on their bottles, on their packages. That SCS brand is something that the Kingfisher mark is something we're proud of at the end of the day, to say, hey, you know, whether it's an audit for like FSC or Rainforest Alliance, we're putting in our name for water and water stewardship. And
so that's really, really interesting. And your clients presumably are really happy with the robustness of the standard if their feedback is what's created that in the first place. And then in terms of where that interacts with the rest of their work, is that informing, for instance, how they would report to the new standard, CSRD, which is for major organisations to report on their environmental impact, but for the first time water's being pulled into that mandatory reporting. So would your standard help them to collate the data in order to report in and set the milestones in order to achieve better in their water footprint?
So coincidentally, like I did a gap analysis across the board of all current water footprints and frameworks and other standards out there that are comparable, and then I'm like, what's next? What are we constantly talking about, but where can we go in the next 10, 20 years that this standard can lead clients and make them, you know, here is what tier 1 is, here's what the core metrics that you have to go through, and consumption and discharge and a water balance, the basics of what we're all talking about with water positive, but actually what's beyond that, in looking at specific water quality indicators like microplastics, MPs, lead and copper, byproducts, PFAS, like all of these are very explained out in the standard that we're certainly proud of, as well as trailblazer methods of holding a company accountable in like nature-based solutions and innovative tech, water positive, water neutral. So it's this nice sort of segue to where climate has already shifted us, and being able to sort of say, hey, we need more collaboration, we need more, you know, movement into that space. This is actually an easy transition, and it gives them credibility simultaneously from both the stakeholder approach as well as from their investor. So
would a client move into your standard from business as usual, or would they already be in water space, sustainability space, and looking for just validation of what they're doing, or do they come to it as a pathway of transition?
We see it all across the board. So just in terms of water metrics, you know, here at WEX, we're talking a lot about the digitization and, you know, AI, and putting those like the sexy tools, you know, into an organization that they can go in and monitor flows. A lot of organizations still don't have that. So we're at this like sort of incremental step right now, where even that's a good spot for them to be like, here's a gap. We need to even fill that gap in. If not, they're going to their water municipality. They're going to their you know, their local source of where actually that invoice to get into an audit, where that invoice, where all the metrics and the data are coming from. So it can be almost like very archaic of what we even saw in like an Erin Brockovich, how she went to the water municipality, to today's time, and you'd think, oh my gosh, everyone must have like water monitoring. Oh my gosh, we must be so ahead, and we're not. So we still, in an opportunistic ways, we still have a really good like open road.
Yeah. And increasingly, so for me, I want to ask you about CSRD, because CSRD, just to explain, is this new mandatory reporting that goes along annual financial reports. So big publicly limited companies will need to report on their environmental impact, and for the first time that brings in biodiversity and water as well as carbon and human impact. And so I'm really interested in that market opening up, because of course for those organisations that are reporting now, they are going to need to push the pressure down their supply chain and up their supply chain in order to achieve, for instance, scope 3, if it were carbon. And so it makes everybody in those supply chains susceptible to needing to be aware of their water and to report on their water and carbon and biodiversity in order that they keep the bids really with these larger organisations. So does that change the organisations that you are opening the doors to now? Like, have you seen a profile in organisations changing to more smaller organisations where previously it would have been larger, or are you seeing the vulnerability and the need to be on it?
I think we're still at a point that, like, shall I say, letting nature take the lead.
Right, yeah.
We're not there yet, and I think we'd like to talk about it, but that requires a lot of vulnerability and humbleness on our part that we're not there yet. I think it's just a human race. But in terms of just like speaking more from a PR and, you know, and getting the word out there, biodiversity is going to be this year's push.
Absolutely.
And with biodiversity comes water. We put a section in the standard specifically about biodiversity, specifically about community development, for the reasons because it's all leading in that direction. It's all connecting back into the environment. And, you know, hopefully in 10, 20 years' time, we'll have a more opportunistic conversation.
Yeah, I think it is positive. Now, I do think
the
fact that you've created a standard in itself shows that there's a demand for people to get it right, not just to greenwash.
Exactly.
The desire has shifted from what can we talk about that sounds good to how can we do this well.
Yeah, and even specifically about the biodiversity section, there is a piece in it about building out a biodiversity management plan. Oh my gosh, like what is that? Very few companies have one right now. I kid you not, in 5 years, everyone's gonna have one. And we already have the metrics around the, I guess I won't say too much about that, but in just terms of the indicators that we have to actually understand what is abundance, what is a gross count, what is, and of the shifting nature of species. And you might think, oh my gosh, that's so far from water.
No, it's
and
not.
It's actually not. So, you know, we're in a fun transition time where, you know, I'm here at WEX talking about AI, talking about, you know, all the good things, water positive, and, you know, being able to connect with awesome colleagues. So you know, it's a patient process.
It is, but I think it's the reason I've got involved with water so much as a sustainability across the board is I just think water is both the next front line in this conversation, but it's so tangible, it tells a story. It's much more tactile in the storytelling for everyone, from children to corporations, than carbon that is difficult to visualize. So I do think it's and also the engineering and the solution provision at WEX that I've witnessed is the engineers can come in, like you're saying, they're coming in to do not just water, but they'll approach biodiversity. You know, you're not just ticking a box, it's about driving forward change in a really credible way, and I think water's going to be the front line of that change. I really do.
I completely agree, and I think we need a bigger narrative, and part of that bigger narrative connects into who we are personally, and a lot of us either are apathetic about where we're at personally, or very passionate, and I think water speaks. It's its own language. It's something that I've written about for a while. Since I, you know, was in my teens, so it's this really like it's a dynamic language that I feel hasn't really been actually brought to its surface in a full narrative. Whether that's like through movies, through social media, through like a whole different type of spiritual language. I mean, like even just being able to be drawn to water and us having to shower and going, oh my gosh, I feel so refreshed. That sigh of relief. So we're going on a tangent, but that's
No,
like...
I completely agree with you. The chap is very kindly putting a blockade for us. That's why I was smiling at him, because he nearly walked straight through the camera. But I completely agree. And I was talking to, I had the great privilege of working with some indigenous tribes on things, and you always hear water as being the great connector, that women were the water keepers in tribes, and that the narrative around water, the thanks that's given to it, we need to get that connection back. I think water, if we're going to go in the philosophical conversation around water, I do think we have lost our spiritual connection to it. There's an expectation that it's just there, it's just a thing, and the value of it in our everyday life is somewhat lost. And to your point, we need to get that back. We need to find ways to change the narrative to be in awe of this thing that we consider to be abundant, that could be abundant but is struggling somewhat at the minute.
Completely. And I come from a more like half Irish, half actually indigenous. So like my fourth great grandfather was in Seneca, Iroquois. So having this really like beautiful connection, and then being able to be like, wait, everyone's connected. It's not just, and having this like, just if you have no water around you or tons of water, I think there's just this beautiful story that we all carry water in connection to us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing connector, I think, water. And if we look at humanity, we settle where water is. Our cities are built where water, our lives are dictated by finding a water source. And so I do think the conversation for sustainability is going to be much more valuable with water at the forefront of it, because I think it's easier.
And getting the kids involved. My 6-year-old niece, she's like, hands down, it's all water, Lauren. She gets it. So it's really actually getting, Yeah,
and I was just hearing about Barcelona that's really struggling with water at the moment, in that they have a polluted water source and it's not been cleaned up, and as a result of that, Barcelona, which is a huge city and at the forefront of modern living, will struggle to have water in the next few years. And when you think about that, it's almost incomprehensible that that's happening in a modern city in Europe. But I think the reality of these conversations really needs to be spoken about more. So, I mean, do you see your clients concerned around the vulnerability of humanity around water? Because at some parts of the States are really feeling it as well, aren't they?
I think they're very concerned about the longevity of their business, and that encompasses taking into account of the larger picture of what is going on in our existential crisis around humanity. And so it's really hard to sort of put one thing aside with the other. I think just the longevity of what does a 30-year outlook look like for you, or even a 50-year, not a 5-year. We need something that's much more scenario-based, that's long-term, that is able to actually give them a very big picture. Even putting on Google Glasses, and you're like, what? That's going to be my P&L in 2090? And you're like, yeah, and this is how if you don't do anything, or status quo. So I've always thought in that kind of like a gaming perspective, how to immerse.
That's really interesting.
How to immerse the client in more of something it's going to make them change versus go, oh, let's just keep going.
But do you find a lot of that with your clients, that this behaviour change, this paradigm shift in thinking is one of the obstacles, or one of the drivers?
It's the driver.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, we get the clients from the opportunistic side that are building out really efficient, water efficiency programs, and really trying to push forward what is water stewardship, what is climate adaptation, how to input, innovative tech, all of these pieces that, we talk about a lot, and we don't know how to actually sometimes, implement at a really, really fast pace.
What's your thinking on AI and water?
I think it's fantastic. I think there's a huge opportunity and there's limitations to it. I think that the opportunity with AI is that it can very much be able to scenario base what we wouldn't have before in a really dramatic way, and also a very critical way for decision making long term.
Okay.
Whereas the limitations to it are, it's AI, you know, like, so what? It's a yellow bike, you know. Like, let's not get ahead of ourselves and be actually really keen and not just be hip with what is the next trend.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, water is the next trend to my mind.
Yeah.
Is there anything else I wanted to ask you? I think we spoke more about your standard, but I'd love to. Is there more that you'd like to tell us about your standard? Do you think we've missed out on anything critical in talking about that standard for water? Is it global? I think it's important to.
It's global. I think the biggest thing is just its value. I think, again, being here was actually a really good indicator for me of people are missing the mark in knowing, like, what is that next step. We need collaboration. We don't talk enough. There's silos, and then there's silos in little corners that I'm like, we're actually hypocritical. What is something that we can do to keep this more, to keep ourselves more aligned with sticking to our own truth and how we're supposed to get this done? I don't think the standard is an end-all be-all in any means. I do think that it's building upon where we've come from in water management, water efficiency, water stewardship, and where we're all now talking about, which is what we've put in the standard about water abundance, water positive. And I don't think it's going to be an overnight, you know, claim, but I think that that's where exactly where it's heading. So I think it really putting emphasis on what is the value for this that you know, consumers actually go, hey, I'll actually pick up this beer because it has, you know, a 50% reduction rate in the water consumption, or it was 10% of rainwater, or it was treated in this way. We need those types of claims, and this, again, it sounds like just stepping stones, but we need those claims because we've already had clients ask us for those claims from a carbon neutrality side, a carbon, you know, so it's working with also what is the need from the client and having them say, okay, we need this, Lauren, like we need this right now to even just keep up with where business is. And I mean, even in the news the other day with Tide, those Tide pods.
Yeah.
In New York, they're being banned in the next, like, probably gonna be a year, but like my sister used Tide pods, and I literally said to her a couple months ago, those are gonna be banned soon because they're just, everything that goes through our wash, in our washing machines, it breaks down the fibers. It is like the worst thing to our gray water system.
Someone, I don't think that they are here, but they've created a bolt-on pipe that goes on the back of washing machines that will collect all the microfibers. I think ingenious things like that you just think that's simple. It can go in every home, and the amount that will stop going into our waterways and really difficult to clear up is just, that's so simple, and it just goes on anywhere. And you know, these, and to your point about picking up a beer because it's got the label on that says that it's been produced in a way that is better for water, we need to make it easy for consumers. It has to be part of the objective, but it has to be credible. It has to not be greenwashing. But at the moment, consumers are so confused. The ones that want to do the right thing don't know how to go about that. And we do really need to help, because that's where the shift comes, isn't it? When everyone can get involved.
And even just touching on ISOs, and like every business owner understands what ISO 9001 is. And that's the most basic part of a quality management system, stepping up to where they went with 14, I think it was 46, with being able to look at like everything from a GHG climate perspective. And I think like where even water footprint is right now, it's like pushing that gamut to the next level and being able to say, okay, what is it that we can hold themselves accountable to? Having that in mind, that at the end of the day, the public doesn't care about a standard.
No, but it enables
it's-
us all to know that that organisation is meeting.
Exactly.
I think we become the peer review, the industry become the peer review that will call that organisation out if
Exactly.
they're not clear.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're seeing the shift come.
Yeah, and it's like a beautiful tandem
Yeah.
process that happens sort of out of
Absolutely.
pressure.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm excited for all
Yeah.
the stuff you're doing, so that's brilliant, and hopefully we'll be able to do more catching up with you as
Yeah.
we go forward. But thank you for everything, and
Yeah,
thanks
thank
for
you.
taking the time to sit down with us and
For sure.
explain it all to us. So
Of
thank
course.
you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.